While console games did have their presence in my house while I was growing up, the vast majority of my time was spent on an old and chunky late 90s PC sitting in the room I shared with my brother back when I was really young. The PS1 and the GameCube had their place, but a lot of the time I had with video games early on was with that old Windows ME tower. Games I have fond memories with, enjoyed playing at the time, and I'm still happy to have them in my hands after all these years. Bugdom wasn't one of those games. Bugdom was developed by Pangea Software and released for Mac computers in 1999 and was published for Windows PCs in 2000 and 2003 by On Deck Interactive and Ideas from the Deep respectively. Pangea themselves have been developing for Apple hardware since 1987, starting with making games for the Apple II GS before moving to the Mac platform in 1991. These days, Pangea is exclusively an Apple developer, and they've hardly developed anything for non-Apple platforms. While PC ports of their earlier titles do exist, they're far and few from what I have seen. You can find everything they've done to this day on their website, though it looks like they haven't updated it visually in a while. Most of their games have since been ported to modern platforms and can be found in the iOS and Mac app stores. You can even still buy CD keys from them today for certain versions of their games. Bugdom is actually fairly well received on launch. It's often considered one of Pangea's best games and one of the best games to the Mac at the time of release. Heck, the game is actually bundled with the iMac DV2000 and later model iBook laptops, and it even did well enough to warrant a sequel in 2002. Games do age though, for better or worse. I did get Bugdom back when I was young, but if my statement from earlier wasn't enough of an indication, I can't say this game falls under any category of memorable for me. I remember this being one of those games I played a few times, but didn't really invest that much time in. Mostly because I remember this game having issues running back then, but then again, the last time this thing saw the inside of a disk drive, I'm pretty sure I just turned 6. Needless to say, my copy hasn't seen the light of day in quite a while, as have a lot of games I own. It's safe to say I didn't finish games as often as I played them, and Bugdom is no exception to that. That's what I want this channel to be, a chance to go back to those old games and give them a full, proper playthrough. A chance to see if they were as good or as bad as I remember, and to see if those old reviews still hold true to this day. What's Bugdom's plot anyway? Well, I'm glad you didn't ask. He plays this roly-poly with sneakers named Roly McFly, who apparently is the last roly-poly capable of saving the land of Bugdom after being overthrown by a clan of fire ants led by the so-called King Thorax. And with that out of the way, let's hurry up and get this over with. The first thing I noted was the lack of sound. I double-checked the footage and OBS still said desktop audio was up, so that wasn't boding very well. Well, we at least have a menu here with some choices. Let's click onto what I can only assume is the options. You know, eventually. Okay, there's no prompts for sound, but I was able to find out that the sound effects were still working. So the first thing I saw was some Comic Sans and a JPEG taking up half the screen. That's nice. Yeah, I know, this was 1999, digital art wasn't exactly at its peak here, but surely they could have at least put a couple more options, or even just leave the bottom half blank. I'm not asking for Toy Story 2 here, just a little more thought in the layout.
Can you even tell what's on? I can tell.
Back to the main menu. Maybe this walnut can shed some light. Today, please? Turns out it's just the controls. I started the game, but it was running at like 20 frames. Not a good start, but I don't remember the game being this bad back then. So, as luck would have it, there's nothing wrong with the game. I'm just a moron. Old games don't like it when you load their data off of a separate drive. I learned that with Sonic R before recording this video, and I forgot about it up until now. I work with computers as my day job. I'm surprised I didn't figure out something like this sooner. What was my associates in again? Reinstalling the game onto the main drive brings the music back, and it's honestly kinda nice. I also want to say how I love how the option to exit to desktop from the main menu is a stick of dynamite. Imagine you click on this and it just... Let's start level 1 properly now. There's these little animations in between each level which set the tone and give you an idea of what kind of enemies you'll encounter. It's a nice little detail. Also, starting the game made me quickly remember why I didn't like it back then. So Bugdom is a 3D platformer. You have these large open areas you explore to find items needed to progress, avoid being attacked by enemies, and to gather up as many points as you can by collecting clovers and rescuing ladybugs. As far as special items go, you have little rollies which give extra lives, health in the form of berries, shells that make you temporarily invincible, as well as these special bees which act as a homing missile to attack the closest enemy. From my experience, there's no benefit to collecting anything outside of a score, unless you have a group of friends you brag about your Bugdom score to, and then you wonder why they make plans without you. Most platformers from this era would have you control things with a keyboard. Bugdom, however, has two different control schemes and your gameplay experience varies heavily depending on what you use. In Bugdom, you got mouse only, and you have keyboard only. Mouse only is weird. You have to keep moving the mouse in the direction you want to move, otherwise you lose momentum and you slow to a crawl. Left click kicks to attack, so 99% of your combat is spent knocking bipedal ants onto their ass. Right click lets you jump. You ever jump in a game before? This is jumping. Enjoy. Keyboard only makes the game a little more manageable. The controls become a little less fluid, but at the same time you have snappier movement compared to the mouse. The best way I can describe it is like going from analog sticks to a D-pad. I feel like mouse only was the truly intended way to play this game, as it seems to provide the most fluid control despite having its own set of issues. I ultimately ended up using a combination of keyboard and mouse, as that was what was most comfortable for me. Funnily enough, this method is actually recommended in the instruction manual as a way to play the game. Speaking of playing the game, for the most part, it ran fine, except for early on when I finished a level and all the textures went to go get lunch. Apparently Bugdom is too much for my 2060. I can't even tell what's happening here. The grass is broken, the floor turned to hardwood, and really looks like an Among Us character. Restarting the game thankfully fixed this, but now's a good time to talk about compatibility mode and why it's important to make sure your games work before you start recording. You see, the world was graced with the presence of Bugdom when the best version of Windows available was Windows 98, with Windows 2000 being just around the corner. Naturally, programs that come out for these aforementioned OSs may or may not play nicely with newer versions of Windows. Compatibility mode exists to resolve some of the issues brought on by this, and to serve as a type of backwards compatibility to these old programs. Now, not every program is the same. Some might run fine without it, some may not, but it never hurts to try and have your software run in a more stable state. Bugdom is one such program that consistently threw fits without it, and it later bit me in the butt. I didn't turn on compatibility mode until around level 6, I think it was. While Bugdom had every texture in the game turned into confetti, I was still able to save. Most of the time. On rare occasions, the game would not render the mouse cursor, and it would basically turn into a game of pin the tail on the donkey. Put the thing you need on a very specific spot, but you can't see where you're putting the thing. Since you can't see where you're putting it, you just have to, throw it in there and pray. This wasn't a problem at first. I honestly kept it off because A, it was funny as hell just to see the game collapse, and B, this allowed me to keep the game's music when recording. Enter level 6, and I become physically unable to proceed because of the glitching. This was the only level which consistently and regularly broke after finishing it. The cursor just refused to render every single time I played the game. This ended up forcing me into turning compatibility mode on, which, for reasons I have yet to understand, wiped out my entire save. Meaning I had to go all the way back from the beginning to level 7 just to continue properly. Thank God for cheat codes, otherwise I would have just done something else. Back to the game now. Bugdom isn't a long game by any stretch of the imagination. There's only 10 levels and 3 of them are boss fights. It took me a combined total of around 4 hours just to finish the whole thing. If you knew exactly where to go and what to do, you could probably finish it within 2. This isn't to say the game isn't without challenge. The game is exploration focused, often having these wide open spaces that require you to look around to find items needed to progress. Sometimes you're thrust into these areas with a lot going on, or into very narrow corridors which can feel a little claustrophobic if the game throws a bunch of enemies around. Later levels sometimes require you to run like heck to avoid them. This becomes especially evident when you run into these cockroaches that spit out gas and obscure your vision. The later levels also have actual explosives! It's very easy to lure enemies into blowing themselves up, but at the same time it's also very easy to do the same to yourself. Word of note, the cockroach gas is flammable and can be set off by the smart bomb bees, so if you're not careful you can launch a bee at the wrong time and reenact the 4th episode of Breaking Bad. Oh, and speaking of enemies, they're everywhere. Enemy and hazard variety varies from level to level, but you have your choice of ants that throw spears, mosquitoes, slugs, caterpillars, spiders, fireflies, ants that throw rocks, praying mantises, actual fire, the same cockroaches from earlier, termites, feet, bats, a metric shit ton of bees, acid, ants that breathe fire, and lava. Actual, honest to God, lava. There's one thing that does annoy me about this game, and it's enemy density. Bugdom does not have very consistent enemy density. Some levels have a couple foes that, while they are a nuisance, they can be easily dealt with or even completely avoided altogether. Other times the developer will throw a literal wall of enemies at you and you have to run for the hills. Stages set in the beehive and the anthill got a little annoying about this due to how claustrophobic those levels are by design. That makes the enemy encounters a little more nerve-wracking as you don't have a lot of room to run. As far as most annoying enemies though, that honor goes to the bees and to the feet. If I'm gonna talk enemy density, I can't not talk about the bees. The bees make a grand appearance in levels 4, 5, 6, and 7 respectively. Level 4 and 5, they aren't that much of an issue. They're a minor obstacle in both levels and are easily shot down with the dragonfly during the flying segment of level 4, and they're easily ignored in level 5. But level 6? It makes sense since you're in a beehive because you have your selection of 3 kinds of bees. The second variety are these bee larvae. They aren't really that much of a problem, and if anything, they're like the termites from earlier levels, but they don't explode when you kick them. Also, you can stomp on them. And last but not least, we have that. We have bipedal, muscular bee men who will chase you if you get too close. Also, if they catch up to you, they launch their stingers and then they die. What am I playing? My main pet peeve with these things revolves around the flying bees. If you have enough of them following you, they can get very close and hog up the camera space, making it very difficult to navigate. You can roll into the bees to get rid of them if Wikipedia is to be believed, but I tried this and it barely worked at all. In a tight corridor-based level like this one, it gets very annoying, very fast. And now let's talk about my favorite part of the game. The jank. Bugdom is from the mid-early years of 3D platformers where developers had somewhat of an idea of what they were doing. The game came out around the same time the PS2 and the Dreamcast were coming out and the 5th generation of games was closing up shop. On top of being a Windows port of a Mac game, Bugdom is not without its technical weirdness. Now, just to be clear, jank isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of old games are janky or just play weird, especially when compared to a modern video game. And even then, they're not immune to the jank. Look at your average Bethesda game for a good example. If anything, the jank adds to the experience in Bugdom. I already stated how the keyboard makes movement a little easier than it would be with just the mouse. What I didn't mention is how as soon as you bring a keyboard into the mix, the laws of physics are blown out the window. I'm not sure why, but for some reason you have a lot more force behind your movement when using the arrow keys instead of the mouse. It gets to an absurd point in most levels because it also makes it very easy to cheat. You can see the force involved simply by going to roll mode and pressing a single arrow key for no more than a second. Rolly will careen off into the sunset and pass the game's draw distance while the camera tries to catch up. This makes a seldom used ability into something overpowered and broken very fast. Not to mention the keyboard also allows you to climb up inclines that are so incredibly steep that any normal thing would be physically incapable of climbing it, yet Rolly can walk up to them like he's been studying the Skyrim horses. And rideable bugs? Well, controlling the Pond Skater in level 3 and the Dragonfly in levels 4 and 5 is completely impossible with the keyboard. These things require the use of the mouse because when you press the arrow keys, you begin to spin at the speed of a high-powered blender and you can't even turn. Collision seems to work when it feels like it in Bugdom. During my playthrough, I found myself trying to find new ways to break the game, as well as weird quirks where there's spots you'd think the game would have collision, but doesn't, or has too much collision. Case example, level 4's feet and how merely being near them counts as damage. Additionally, the slug enemy covered in spikes. Now, if you've played pretty much any video game ever, natural instinct would tell you spikes bad. One look at these things would tell you that you need to stay away from them because they obviously have a larger than normal hitbox thanks to those spikes, so it probably wouldn't be a good idea to run straight into them. There's even an area encasing a ladybug with 2 of these things, and in theory, you have to sit between the slugs and wait to get her out. But nah, you see the spikes are merely for show. They're animated, yes, but the spikes themselves have no hitbox. They're completely static. You can literally walk right through them with no problems as long as you don't touch the actual body. Also, it is shockingly easy to clip through walls in this game. In fact, the first time I did it was by complete accident. I accidentally phased through a wall into an enclosure trying to avoid an enemy. After that, I figured out how to do it on purpose. If you use keyboard controls, pick a wall that's a 2D texture and start jumping while moving against it and along it, you'll eventually phase through that wall like it has a hole in it. Keep in mind, this only works on walls that are 2D textures. In the Beehive and Anthill levels where the ceiling is made out of floor, it's not gonna work. Trust me, I tried. This is perfect if you don't want to do levels from start to finish if you die and you just want to get back to where you lost, or if you're doing some kind of speedrun or damage run and want to make it a little extra fun. But enemy projectiles know no boundaries, so if you do decide to cheese the game, you better remember where the enemies are because you'll be minding your own business, walking in spots devs never wanted you to be in, and then before you know it, a rock will come through the grass and say hello. On a related note, Bugdom has a pretty annoying bug when you load from a save. Regardless of how you end the previous level, if you load the game, you can spawn in with literally no health. This caused me a lot of grief in level 4 because not only did I have no lives, I had to actively search for and remember where a health pickup was without getting sent to the pearly gates too soon. It got so bad that I ended up trying to use the roll ability to chuck myself across the level just to avoid everything, which resulted in this. In case you couldn't tell, I broke it. It's possible to move so fast with the roll ability and the keyboard that you can basically escape the game. I had absolutely no clue where I was here. You can tell I'm moving if you watch the skybox. You can't see me, but it's obvious. Oh, there he is. Unfortunately, I was not able to bring myself back to the stage. I had no idea how far I actually was from the level, so as far as I was concerned, this was a soft lock and I had to restart. I soon cheated through that part of the level just to get past it. I honestly couldn't take it anymore. Now, just to clarify, I only cheated past the feet. I finished the rest of it as intended. I got past the spiders, I went around the ants, and I finished the flying segment without any cheats. This one's gonna be short and sweet. Bugdom's camera works, but that doesn't necessarily mean it works well. I wouldn't say the camera is broken, it's just a pain to use. Manual movement of the camera requires keyboard control per the options menu, but it's these keys that move it left and right, so it makes it a bit of a pain if you want to look around if you use the control method I did. The rest of the time the camera moves with the player like it does in any other game. I honestly think this game would have benefited from a toggle switch that enables the mouse for camera movement instead of, just regular movement. In short, it's not bad, but it could be better. Alright, let's cap this thing off with the bosses. The game has 3 of them. The Beehive, the Queen Bee, and King Thorax himself. The Beehive boss is in level 5 and, honestly, I'm not even sure if it counts as a boss. It's not like the Beehive has anything coming out of it or anything. You can literally just carpet bomb it into next week and finish it within a minute. Nothing much to say about this one. The Queen Bee in level 7 though? This thing. The Queen Bee is the most annoying boss in the whole game, and I'm not saying that because the bee hate train has no brakes. This is one of the few challenging things you will encounter in this game. You see, the Queen Bee can only be attacked by the roll ability. Do it enough times, she'll keel over, and you win. Now, surely not that much can really be annoying. The Queen has her own set of attacks, which mainly revolve around this glob of honey she spits out. I noticed that there doesn't seem to be a set trigger for this attack specifically. Originally, I thought it was based on distance, get too far away from her, she'll spit out the honey. Now, this is kind of true, but she also used the attack when I was right next to her one time, but then again, that could have just been the game's jank rearing its ugly head again. This glob of honey is also the bane of my existence. The honey not only slows down your regular movement, but can stop your roll right in its tracks. Now, this is a boss fight after all. They're not supposed to be easy, especially this late in the game. Surely this is the only issue this boss has in terms of difficulty. I came up with the theory that the honey was distance-based as I explored the tunnels surrounding the arena the game puts you in. These tunnels exist to contain more mushrooms for you to collect so you don't run out of rolling ability when fighting the boss. Some of the walking bees from the previous level can be found here, but they're not that much of an issue and they're easily avoided. What is an issue is that when you spend a good amount of time collecting enough mushrooms, by the time you get back to the queen, she's drowning in honey. And if you want to make sure all that sweet golden garbage goes away, you basically gotta be right next to her, and like I said, that sometimes doesn't even work. Okay, yeah, the queen is annoying, I've established this, but she's not that bad. It's not like the level itself is trying to About halfway through the boss, things will start to get more annoying as more bees start spawning. The bees are of the flying variety, as well as the larvae. The larvae can hide in the slime, which makes it annoying and easy to take damage from them, and the flying ones hog up the camera like they usually do. Oh, did I mention the queen also moves around? Because she moves around and it's the worst part of the boss. Yeah, it's more annoying than the honey. Between each attack, the queen will float into the air and land again. Sometimes you can attack her, the rest of the time she will land in the impenetrable wall of snot and you can't touch her. At the same time, you have to deal with the larvae and the flying bees that won't leave you alone. Also, some of the more eagle-eyed may have noticed there's some dark spots on the floor. These spots tend to have spikes coming out of them. It makes it so much more annoying, especially since the queen will land on said spots and make it impossible to touch her. This boss took me forever. I wish I had more footage, but I'm a moron and I lost a chunk of it through technical problems. Thank you, OBS. You're great software. Finally, we have King Thorax, the big man himself, at level 10. If the Queen Bee was any indication of what is to come, especially since level 8 wasn't a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination, this is gonna be a mess. Let's see what sort of tricks the King of Fire Ants has up his.
1 minute, 37 seconds later.
This boss was a pushover. I'm not even kidding. No effort was spent struggling to finish this. The footage that you're watching on screen right now is the unedited footage of me playing the boss from start to finish. The time card was not an exaggeration. I was able to finish this level within 2 minutes. The concept itself is simple. Thorax walks around with his head on fire, occasionally throwing projectiles at you, along with a few of his fire-breathing ant buddies. Kick the nearby water pipes to spew water and put him out. Kick him for damage, repeat until dead. I only died once, and that was because of the health bug. I was legitimately done and over with this boss under 2 minutes. I get that Bugdom is a game for kids and all, but as far as final bosses go, I think that was the easiest one I've ever played. You can basically ignore all the other enemies and just focus on King Thorax. There is no benefit to purposefully putting yourself in danger. Just kick the pipes, kick the man, repeat until you win. That's it. Once you knock the king onto his butt, you get a reverse version of the game over screen, and that's it. Back to title screen. Game is over. And that is Bugdom, a well-received PC game from the early days of 3D platformers. And now, my final question. Is Bugdom a good game? In my opinion, yes and no. By modern standards, obviously not. It's extremely bare bones as far as platformers go, even for the era it came out in. But at the same time, it still manages to be entertaining with what it has and during its gameplay, even if unintentionally. The game has some technical issues that add to the enjoyment of the game, despite what you would expect. It's just so much fun to try and mess with the collision, and honestly, this game could make a half-decent speedrun challenge. Just get to clipping and see how fast you can finish every level. On top of that, the world it puts you in and how ridiculous it gets as the game goes on, you can't help but enjoy it. From the fire-breathing ants to the bipedal bodybuilder bees, Bugdom just manages to surprise you the more you play. For something out of 2000, Bugdom ain't half bad. Maybe if I understood how computers worked a little more back then, I probably would have been able to get this game running properly and enjoy it a little more than I did. For the time it released, I think those positive ratings are well deserved. Yeah, some spots of the game are a little inconsistent, but it doesn't detract from the overall experience, and for that, the game is okay in my book. And that concludes this video. If you stuck around to the very end, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Maybe consider subscribing and leaving a like too. This has been Bugdom. I'm Mr. Max. Thank you for watching.
Tell me how the grass tastes, little man! Ah! Oh!